June 19, 1944. A Japanese pilot named Warrant Officer Kinsuke Muto climbs into his Mitsubishi Zero over the Philippine Sea. He's a veteran. He survived 2 years of combat. Within 8 hours, 243 Japanese aircraft would be shot down. The Americans would lose 29. The fighter that did this? Japanese pilots had been calling it the fat joke for 2 years. Navy brass had called it obsolete before it even flew. And it would achieve a kill ratio so lopsided that historians still argue about whether the numbers are even real. Let's rewind to November 1943. Rabaul, a Japanese stronghold in the South Pacific, fortified with over 300 aircraft and some of Japan's best pilots. American intelligence photographs showed the airfields packed with Zeros, ready to shred any incoming raid. The attack force appeared on the horizon, but instead of the nimble wildcats the Japanese expected, they saw these things. Fat fuselages, thick wings. One Japanese pilot later wrote in his diary that they looked like flying barrels with propellers. The radio chatter from Rabaul that day was full of confidence, laughter even. What do you think happened next? The flying barrels shot down 30 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement and lost one. The fighter was the F-6F Hellcat, and in November 1943, most people, including some American pilots, thought it was a mistake. It was 2,000 pounds heavier than the nimble Zero. It couldn't turn as tightly. It climbed slower in a dogfight. On paper, it should have been target practice for Japan's elite aviators. But here's what the Japanese didn't know yet. The joke was on them, and the punchline would take 18 months and 5,223 enemy aircraft to deliver. Keep this number in mind, 5,223. We'll come back to it. To understand why the Hellcat seemed like a joke, you need to understand what it was replacing and what it was fighting against. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. Within months, the Japanese military steamrolls across the Pacific. Guam falls, Wake Island falls, the Philippines fall like dominoes. And in every battle, one aircraft dominates the sky, the Mitsubishi, a 6M Zero. The Zero was a masterpiece. It could outturn anything America had. It could outclimb almost any fighter in the world. In the hands of a trained pilot, it was almost untouchable. Japanese aviators racked up kill after kill. The phrase "zero on your six" became synonymous with death. American pilots flying the F-4F Wildcat, the primary carrier fighter, were getting slaughtered. The Wildcat was tough, sure, but slow, heavy. In a turning fight with a Zero, you were a dead man. Pilots developed desperate tactics. Never dogfight, always dive away, hope your engine didn't quit. The math was brutal. In early 1942, kill ratios hovered around 1-to-1, sometimes worse. For every Zero shot down, the Japanese were taking an American with them, or two. So when Grumman Aircraft started designing a replacement in 1942, the U.S. Navy had one demand: beat the Zero at its own game. Make it light, make it nimble, make it turn. Grumman said no. The Hellcat's tactics were about to face the ultimate test, a battle so one-sided that historians call it by a darkly comedic name. But before we get there, if you're enjoying this deep dive into aviation history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more stories about the weapons, battles, and decisions that changed wars. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Here's where the story gets interesting. Grumman's lead engineer, a man named Leroy Grumman, looked at combat reports from the Pacific and saw something everyone else missed. American pilots weren't losing because their planes couldn't turn. They were losing because their planes couldn't take punishment and keep fighting. Wildcats were coming back to carriers with holes you could stick your fist through, and they were still flying. Zeros were elegant death traps. A few bullets and they'd burst into flame because they had no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Japanese pilots were flying coffins wrapped in silk, so Grumman built the opposite of a Zero. The F-6F Hellcat was heavy, 13,000 pounds fully loaded. It had armor plating behind the pilot's seat thick enough to stop 20mm cannon rounds. It had self-sealing fuel tanks. It had 6.50 caliber machine guns that could saw a Zero in half. And it had something the Zero could never match, a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. But it couldn't turn worth a damn. Navy test pilots flew it in early 1943 and came back shaking their heads. "It's a truck," one said. Another called it a flying tank. The joke spread through naval aviation. Grumman had built a fighter that couldn't fight even worse. It was replacing the Wildcat, which at least had the excuse of being old. The Hellcat was brand new and already obsolete, or so everyone thought. The first squadron equipped with Hellcats deployed to the Pacific in September 1943. Japanese intelligence got their hands on photographs. Radio intercepts picked up the laughter. "The Americans are desperate," one IJN report concluded. "They're sending fat targets." If you think this was the biggest miscalculation of the Pacific War, keep watching. The worst was still yet to come. Let's talk about what actually happened when Hellcats met Zeros in combat for the first time. Marcus Island, September 1st, 1943. A small raid, barely worth mentioning in the history books. 12 Hellcats from USS Yorktown, tangled with an equal number of Zeros defending the atoll. The Zero pilots did exactly what they'd been trained to do: pull into tight turns, force the Americans into a dogfight, shred them at close range. It had worked for 2 years. It had never failed. Except this time, the American fighters didn't turn with them. They didn't even try. Instead, they climbed. Straight up. Impossibly fast. The Zeros tried to follow, but their engines gasped in the thin air. The Hellcats kept climbing. 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, then rolled over and came screaming back down at 400 miles per hour. Now, here's the thing about physics. Speed equals energy, and energy in a dive equals life or death. The Hellcats slashed through the Zero formation like sharks through minnows. 6 Zeros went down in flames. The Hellcats lost none. The Japanese pilots who survived were confused. These American planes were supposed to be slow, supposed to be heavy. How did they climb like that? How did they accelerate so fast? The answer was simple. That 2,000 horsepower engine wasn't there to make the Hellcat turn. It was there to make it go up and then go down. Very, very fast. But this was just one small battle. The real test was coming, and it would change the war in the Pacific forever. June 19th, 1944. The Philippine Sea. This is where our story began. But now you understand the context. The Japanese Navy has assembled its remaining carrier strength, 9 carriers, over 400 aircraft. For one final decisive battle, they're going to crush the American invasion of Saipan. The plan is classic Japanese naval doctrine: launch massive strikes, overwhelm the enemy with numbers, win through superior pilot skill. Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa is confident. His pilots have trained for this. And yes, they've heard reports about these fat American fighters. But numbers will win the day: 400 Japanese aircraft against maybe 300 American. The math works. At 10 a.m., the first wave launches, 69 aircraft. They fly toward the American fleet, expecting to find scattered task forces, maybe some resistance. What they find instead is hell. American radar, something the Japanese still don't fully understand, picks them up 150 miles out. Every Hellcat on every carrier launches. Within minutes, there are over 200 F-6 F fighters in the air, stacked in layers from 10,000 to 25,000 feet. The Japanese formation flies straight into a buzzsaw. Commander David McCampbell, leading VF-15, spots the first wave and radios a call that would become legend. "Looks like the Japs are saving us a trip, let's get 'em." What followed wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Hellcats dove from above with speed the Zeros couldn't match. When Zeros tried to maneuver, the Hellcats simply powered away, climbed, and dove again. The Americans had learned their lessons. No turning fights, no close-in knife fights, just slashing attacks using speed and altitude. Japanese pilots frantically radioed back to their carriers. "Enemy fighters are too fast, cannot engage, cannot escape." By the end of the day, the score was devastating. Wave 1, 42 Japanese aircraft shot down out of 69. Wave 2, 98 out of 130 destroyed. Wave 3, 73 out of 82 obliterated. Wave 4, 30 out of 49 burned into the sea. Total American losses, 29 aircraft. Most of those ran out of fuel trying to get home in the dark. An American pilot, watching Japanese planes fall like rain, keyed his radio and said, "Hell, this is like a turkey shoot." The name stuck. The Battle of the Philippine Sea became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. But listen to this. One Japanese carrier, the Taiho, had launched 42 aircraft that morning. 5 came back. 5. The other 37 were swatted from the sky by a fighter everyone had called a joke. And yet, believe it or not, this was still not the Hellcat's finest hour. October 24th, 1944. Leyte Gulf, the Philippines. The largest naval battle in history is unfolding. The Japanese are throwing everything they have left, battleships, cruisers, carriers, in one final desperate gamble to destroy the American invasion fleet commander David McCampbell, remember that name, is already an ace with 21 kills. He's flying his Hellcat, a plane he's named Minzy 3, off the USS Essex at dawn. His fighter direction officer tells him there's a massive Japanese strike inbound, over 60 aircraft, bombers, torpedo planes, and 0 escorts. McCampbell has 7 Hellcats. 7. He doesn't hesitate. He leads his tiny flight straight toward a formation that outnumbers them nearly 9-1. What happened next became the single greatest fighter mission in U.S. Navy history. For 90 minutes, McCampbell and his wingman, Roy Rushing, tore through that Japanese formation. They used every tactic the Hellcat made possible. Diving attacks from above, zoom climbs to regain altitude, slashing runs that gave the Zeros no chance to turn inside them. McCampbell's gun camera footage shows aircraft after aircraft exploding, spinning, burning. He fired until his guns ran dry. Then he kept flying, coaching other pilots, directing the defense. McCampbell finally landed back on Essex. His maintenance crew counted his ammunition. 0 rounds left. They counted his kills for that single mission. 9 confirmed, possibly more. Roy Rushing got 6. 15 kills in one mission by 2 Hellcats. The Japanese strike was shattered before it reached the fleet. McCampbell would end the war as the Navy's top ace with 34 kills, every single one in a Hellcat. When reporters asked him about the plane, he said something that perfectly captured what Grumman had built. "The Zero could turn inside me, sure, but I could outclimb it, outdive it, outrun it, and outgun it. I could choose when to fight and when to leave. The Zero pilot never had a choice." That's the secret the Japanese never cracked. The Hellcat didn't need to dogfight. It didn't need to be nimble. It needed to be exactly what it was: a brutal, powerful, forgiving weapon system that could absorb damage, deliver punishment, and bring its pilot home alive. April 1945. Okinawa. The war is almost over, but the Japanese have one card left to play: the kamikaze. Thousands of suicide pilots trained for one mission: to crash into American ships and die. The mathematics are terrifying. You can't intimidate a kamikaze. You can't outmaneuver a pilot who doesn't care about coming home. The only way to stop them is to shoot them down before they reach the fleet, every single one, because even one getting through could sink a destroyer or cripple a carrier. The Hellcat became the shield. Operating from carriers offshore, Hellcats flew combat air patrol missions 24 hours a day. They stacked in layers: low, medium, high. Every radar contact was intercepted, every bogey investigated, every kamikaze hunted. The numbers from Okinawa are staggering. From April to June 1945, Hellcat pilots shot down over 600 Japanese aircraft, most of them kamikazes. They flew in weather that grounded other fighters. They flew at night using primitive radar. They flew until they were so exhausted they had to be lifted from their cockpits. One pilot, Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, developed a tactic called the mowing machine. 4 Hellcats flying in a precise formation that could bracket and destroy multiple kamikazes in seconds. His squadron shot down 50 enemy aircraft in 1 month without losing a single pilot. But here's the part that doesn't make it into the glory stories. The Hellcats that limped back to carriers with chunks missing, wings shredded, engines smoking. The planes that took hits meant for ships. The pilots who flew 3, 4, 5 missions a day because there was no one else to do it. At Okinawa, the Hellcat proved it wasn't just a superior fighter. It was a workhorse, a guardian. The kind of aircraft you could beat to hell and it would still fly, still fight, still bring you home. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, Hellcat pilots had shot down 5,223 enemy aircraft. They'd lost 270 in air combat. That's a kill ratio of 19-1. 19 Japanese aircraft destroyed for every Hellcat lost to enemy fighters. It's one of the most lopsided combat records in military aviation history. Some historians think the real number might be even higher because many kills over water were never confirmed. After the war, American and Japanese engineers sat down together and tried to understand what had happened. How did the joke fighter dominate so completely? The Zero had been a brilliant design for 1940. But Japan's economy couldn't keep up. They couldn't build better engines. They couldn't add armor without destroying the plane's performance. They couldn't train replacement pilots fast enough because fuel was scarce. By 1944, average Japanese pilot training had dropped from 500 hours to 100 hours. Some kamikaze pilots had less than 50. Meanwhile, American pilots were getting 300+ hours before they ever saw combat. They had endless fuel for training. They had gunnery schools, tactics schools, survival schools, and they had an aircraft that forgave mistakes. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, one of the few to survive the war, wrote about facing Hellcats in his memoir. "We could not afford to make mistakes, the Americans could. Their planes were tough, ours were fragile. A Zero hit in the fuel tank exploded. A Hellcat hit in the fuel tank kept flying. That was the difference." But there's a deeper lesson here, one that echoes across military history. The Hellcat wasn't trying to be the best fighter in a vacuum. It was built to be the best fighter for the actual war it would fight. A war of attrition, of long-range carrier operations, of pilot survival, of industrial production. Grumman built 12,275 Hellcats in just over 2 years. They were so easy to maintain that carrier crews could swap an engine in under an hour. They were so reliable that pilots trusted them in conditions that would ground other aircraft. They were so tough that pilots walked away from crashes that should have been fatal. Japan built fewer than 11,000 Zeros during the entire war, and by 1945, they were obsolete relics flown by teenagers with barely enough training to take off. The joke wasn't that the Hellcat was fat. The joke was that anyone thought weight mattered more than power, protection, and production. Remember Rabaul in 1943? The Japanese pilots laughing at the flying barrels? By 1945, there were no veterans left to laugh. Most of them were gone, shot down by the very aircraft they once mocked. The Hellcat was never glamorous. It never achieved the mythical status of the P-51 Mustang or the Spitfire. It didn't have a flashy nickname like Jug or Warhawk. Pilots just called it the Cat. And that was enough. After the war, most Hellcats were scrapped or sold to Allied nations. A few found their way into museums. Today, only a handful still fly. Big, blue, workmanlike machines that often sit in the background at air shows, overshadowed by sleeker legends. But here's what they accomplished. They broke Japanese naval aviation. They shielded the fleet. They brought their pilots home. They won air superiority so completely that by 1945, American ships could sail within sight of Japan with almost no air threat at all. And they did it while everyone called them a joke. The last Hellcat combat mission came in 1954, flown by the French Navy in Indochina. The pilot reported the aircraft performed flawlessly. 12 years after its first flight, in a jungle war half a world away, the Cat was still bringing its pilots home alive. That's the real punchline. The Hellcat wasn't trying to be beautiful, nimble, or legendary. It was trying to win. And it did. If you think this was the only time American industrial might crushed a technically superior opponent, check out our video about the D-Day bunkers from a German officer's perspective.